My name is Sophie Clark, and I'm 34 years old. That evening, inside a five-star hotel in downtown Boston, the crystal chandeliers glimmered down on the gown my mother had chosen for my brother and his new fiancé. The engagement party unfolded before more than 200 guests, investors, media figures, and powerful members of my father's company board. I stood quietly in the corner, as always, in the plain dress my mother shoved into my hands as I stepped into the changing room. I didn't get to choose. I never had. But what I didn't expect was that, just as I was about to leave, my mother suddenly strode over, slapped me across the face in front of hundreds of eyes, and shouted as if I were a stain on her perfect scene. "Stop shaming this family. You're just an unemployed freeloader living off us." The entire ballroom froze. No one defended me. No one asked if I was okay. But only a few minutes later, the main doors swung open, and a man in a sharp gray suit walked in. He was the CEO of Westbridge Capital, the investment firm that had just poured hundreds of millions into my father's company. He came straight toward me, smiled, and said, "Good to see you, boss. Have you ever been dismissed by your entire family, only for those who treated you as invisible to one day bow to the truth? If you have, leave a comment below, like this video if you believe success doesn't need permission. And if you want to hear what happened after that fateful greeting, hit subscribe, because right after that moment, everything turned upside down, and I, the silent shadow for 15 years, stepped into the light in a way no one saw coming. While the sting of my mother's slap still burned on my cheek and the crowd's eyes hadn't shifted away, that calm greeting cut through the air like a blade. "Good to see you, boss." I still remember it vividly. Not because it was dramatic like in a movie, but because of the silence that followed. A suffocating, absolute silence. My mother froze in place, her hands still suspended midair, her whole body turned to stone. Jacob stood with his mouth open, eyes wide with confusion. The man who had greeted me, Richard Donovan, was the very CEO my father had spent over 3 years trying to secure as a partner. I turned my head, nodded slightly, and smiled a smile no one in that room had ever seen on my face. "Thank you for arriving right on time," I said, my voice steady even though my cheek was still burning. He smiled back. "I couldn't miss your brother's grand celebration, but I hope you have a few minutes afterward to go over tomorrow's contract signing." I nodded. "I have a temporary office upstairs. We can go right now, if you'd like." And to my family's utter shock, I walked alongside Richard Donovan, leaving behind that elegant but hollow ballroom where, for years, I had only been a shadow. My name is Sophie Clark. I was born and raised in a 3-story mansion in Lake Forest, a wealthy suburb of Chicago. From the outside, everything looked flawless. A father who founded the construction giant Clark and Morrison, a mother who once built a career as an event planner, and a younger brother, Jacob, the son they treasured like gold. I was the eldest. But that never earned me respect. From the time I was small, I was assigned kitchen duty every time there was a party. "Sophie can cook, let her handle it," my mother would say in front of her friends, while Jacob put on a suit, greeted guests, and collected compliments. At first, I thought it was fair. I was good at cooking, I liked seeing people enjoy my food. But over time, it became a label, not a hobby, but an obligation. I still remember Jacob's 16th birthday. My mother hired a private chef and a professional decorator. My assignment? Wash more than 200 crystal glasses after the party. I begged to join the celebration, but my mother just looked at me like I'd said something absurd. "You're backstage staff, Sophie. Don't make a mess of things." That sentence haunted me for years. I got into the University of Wisconsin on a full scholarship. No one from my family came to my orientation. My mother said she was too busy planning a friend's engagement party. Jacob had an art class he couldn't skip. At 18, I left home. I didn't look back. But every holiday season, every big family event, an email from my mother would arrive. come home, help with the cooking. Not, we miss you, not, are you doing well? But don't forget the truffle mushrooms, or be early to set up the tables. I always went. Partly because I didn't want my father to hear her complaints, partly because I still believed that if I tried hard enough, they'd see my worth. But the years passed, and nothing changed. Jacob's path was different. He was never asked to lift a finger. He graduated with average grades, but my parents paid for his master's in New York, then placed him as an assistant in my father's company. Every step laid out, every carpet rolled open. Me? I was between jobs, can't hold down a position. My mother once introduced me to her friends as the family maid with a blood tie. Part of me blamed them. But part of me blamed myself more for staying silent, for believing patience would someday pay off. Things only shifted when I chose not to live by their script anymore. After leaving home, I worked a string of jobs: waitress, dishwasher, busser, then marketing assistant at a restaurant. I soaked up everything about management, operations, branding. And one day, I realized my true skill wasn't cooking, it was spotting potential others ignored. I founded Aurora Concepts at 28, out of a rented apartment in Brooklyn. No one knew. No one in my family ever asked. And I didn't tell. I wanted to prove myself not with the Clark name, but with my own, Sophie. We started with one small cafe contract, then a boutique hotel, then a restaurant chain. 3 years later, we were advising over 50 clients in hospitality and events across New York and California. A team of 30, revenues topping $20 million a year. I had everything except recognition from the people who should have believed in me the most. But at Jacob's engagement party, when Richard Donovan walked in and called me boss before the city's elite, everything turned a corner no one expected. I sat across from him later in a small conference room on the 6th floor of the hotel. The room was hushed, far away from the noise downstairs, where my mother was likely scrambling to patch up the family's shattered image in front of 200 guests. "I didn't mean to make things awkward for you," Donovan said, dabbing his glasses with a cloth. "But I have to admit, I never thought I'd meet the CEO of Aurora Concepts at William Clark's son's engagement." I smiled faintly. "And I didn't think I'd be slapped in front of you." He chuckled, his voice low, tinged with regret. "You're remarkably composed. Most people in your position would have reacted differently. I'm used to it. My family, they've always thought of me as the failure." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "They were wrong." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. This meeting was the answer. Aurora Concepts was built from nothing, sleepless nights, contracts negotiated word by word, no family money, no connections opening doors. I started with what others threw away: failing diners, boutique hotels on the brink of closure, brands the market had forgotten. I didn't use the Clark name on my registration. I used Sophie H. Evans, my grandmother's surname. She was the only one who ever asked me who I wanted to be, instead of who I was supposed to serve. For 5 years, Aurora grew in that anonymity, because no one knew I was William Clark's daughter. They judged me on results. I led the rebrand of a hotel chain in Florida that bounced back from near collapse in 8 months. I rebuilt the identity of a fine dining group in Napa Valley. I directed the launch of an award-winning French wine label, the same industry my father once dismissed as flashy but unsustainable. Yet, every time I went home, the same questions came. "Are you still at that job? When will you finally settle down?" My mother's tone was softer, but her words cut no less deep. "Have you thought about assisting Jacob? He needs someone to manage his schedule. Office work might suit you better than bouncing around." I would smile, shrugging it off, but each word was a knife. I never told them about Aurora. Not out of fear, but because I no longer needed their pride. I wanted to prove I could stand without asking permission. I've been following Aurora for over a year, Donovan said, pulling me back from my thoughts. You work smart, not flashy, no self-promotion. But your clients always come back. We focus on long-term strategy, not selling glitter, but stability. That's why I trust you. He met my eyes. And that's why I have to say I regret seeing how your family treated you tonight. I sat straighter, my hand resting on the glass table. They don't know who I am, but they will soon. I stayed quiet. Tomorrow, if nothing changes, I'll sign a 5-year contract with Aurora. We'll begin with hospitality, but I also want to discuss education projects I'm building in Texas. We're ready. He stood, extended his hand. See you at tomorrow's meeting. I shook it with the practiced firmness I'd learned in my first negotiation workshop. When he left, I lingered, gazing down at Boston through the frosted glass. Below, the party likely carried on. Jacob fielding whispers of, "Who was that woman your mother slapped?" My mother I couldn't picture. Her face when she heard Richard Donovan call me boss. The irony was, even in her collapse, part of me wanted to explain, wanted to say, I don't blame you entirely. She was raised in a society that believed a woman's value lay in keeping house, hosting parties, and knowing when to stay silent. She could not understand the idea of a woman sitting at a negotiation table, making decisions that affected thousands of employees. But that was no longer my concern. I had built my own path. And though that path had been full of obstacles, it was the only place where I ever felt free. I stepped out of the conference room and back into the grand hall. No one dared look at me the same way anymore. A few guests nodded, trying to appear friendly. Jacob stared at me as though I were a stranger. I didn't need to explain. They would soon understand. And what they thought no longer had the power to hold me back. I noticed my mother standing at the far end of the hall, near the buffet where fresh ice had just been added to the champagne buckets. She was talking with a group of elegantly dressed women, but her eyes kept flicking toward me, betraying the unease she could no longer hide. That look was nothing like the ones she had given me all my life. No contempt, no indifference. Only confusion mixed with fear, as though the wall she had spent over 30 years building was cracking right before her eyes. Just a week earlier, I had still been the forgotten eldest daughter of this family, the one called back every holiday, not to gather, but to serve. That call came on a Wednesday afternoon, and I remember it clearly. My mother didn't ask if I was busy. "Sophie, come home Friday. Jacob and Emily's engagement will be at the Grand Allura Hotel. About 200 guests, I'll send the list later. You'll handle guest reception, decorations, setting up the meeting rooms, and making sure the food goes out. I can't trust anyone else. I was in a meeting with the creative director of a cosmetics brand discussing the next quarter's campaign. Hearing those words, I set my pen down, keeping my voice as calm as possible. What exactly do you want me to do at Jacob's event? I just told you. Do what you're good at. Coordinate, organize, check the kitchen. I've already told the hotel staff a family member would manage the event. Saves us a decent amount. I'm your daughter, not a hired server. She paused a few seconds, then let out a soft laugh, the kind that always made me feel like a fool. Don't exaggerate, Sophie. This is what you've always done every year. Weren't you in the kitchen past midnight at Thanksgiving or last Christmas when everyone said the food you made was wonderful? I leaned back in my chair because back then I was naive. Her tone shifted, the pretense gone. If you don't come, I'll be very disappointed. I'm running a company. I have work. What company? Her patience wore thin. Don't use those silly excuses. You don't have a stable job, you don't have a family, no one needs you but us. This is your chance to contribute something to this household. What about Jacob? Jacob is a man. He has bigger responsibilities. I have responsibilities too. A long silence. Don't be selfish, Sophie. If you don't come, don't ever set foot in this house again. Don't think I'll forgive you if you embarrass us. I stared at my laptop screen, the campaign budget spreadsheet just updated. Nearly $2 million in marketing funds. I was the final approver. The one signing the contract. I'm not coming. Because you're jealous of your brother? I exhaled slowly. No, mother, because I've grown up. And I won't let anyone call me useless ever again. You think you're better than anyone in this family? You're not even half of Jacob. He knows how to behave, he has goals, he doesn't bring shame on to us the way you do. The call ended with the slam of a phone. I didn't say another word, I didn't need to. For 15 years, I had lived like a ghost in my own family. Existing, serving, disappearing. No one asked if I was tired, sad, or if I had dreams. They only called when they needed someone in the kitchen, someone to clean, someone to arrange every glass and flower on the tables. I once hoped that if I just did well enough, stayed quiet enough, one day they might look at me and say my name without bitterness. That day never came, until I rewrote the story for myself. Aurora Concepts was born in silence, grew in silence, and step by step entered the light without anyone's support. I used to wonder if my parents knew their daughter was behind the luxury brands they praised at dinner parties. Would they see me differently? I stopped hoping for that long ago. But now, as every eye in the ballroom turned to me, as Richard Donovan stepped out of the elevator and called me boss, in front of hundreds who thought I was unemployed, I didn't feel anger anymore. I only felt sadness. Because perhaps, of all the things I had achieved, the one thing I could never have was a family that valued their daughter without needing a shock to recognize her worth. 3 days before the engagement, just as I left Aurora's Soho office, an email marked confidential popped up on my phone. The subject line read, Confidential, Westbridge Capital X Aurora Concepts, Final Review. I stopped right there on the sidewalk in front of my usual bookstore near Union Square, where I went every Friday. My heart skipped a beat as I read the contents. Richard Donovan wanted to meet me in Boston on the 15th at 8 a.m. on the executive floor of the Grand Allura Hotel, the very place hosting Jacob's engagement. I read it 3 times to be sure. This wasn't a preliminary meeting. It was the final review before signing a 5-year contract, a comprehensive strategic partnership between Aurora Concepts and Westbridge Capital, a firm managing hundreds of millions of dollars in hospitality and dining assets. We had spent 6 months preparing, more than 20 departments on both sides involved, dozens of online meetings, edits on every slide and report. Finally, this was the closing step. A contract worth $32 million with long-term priority for Aurora in Westbridge's luxury hotel chain across the U.S. I gripped my phone tightly, standing still in the rush of people. That hotel, that day, the same hour, I had to choose. On one side, family orders, be there, run the backstage, don't cause problems. On the other, the opportunity to lift my company to a level my team and I had bled, sweated, and lost sleep for. I went back to the office later than usual. The 3rd-floor conference room, still lit, strategy staff finalizing documents for the partner. Maria, the deputy director, looked up when I walked in. You got the confirmation? I nodded. The meeting is the morning of my brother's engagement, I said slowly. She froze, then looked at me with concern. Do they even know how important this deal is? I gave a short laugh. They think I'm still job hunting. The room fell silent. I sat down, opened my laptop, and checked schedules. At noon, my mother planned the program rehearsal. At 2, menu review. At 5, guest reception. And throughout, I was assigned to coordinate hotel staff, prepare media materials, stay behind stage, and not make a single mistake. I stared at the timelines. then switched tabs to the Westbridge proposal with my name printed under Chief Executive Officer. I had signed it. Richard hadn't. We were 99% there. All that remained was my presence, my vision, 3 questions answered, feedback addressed, and then the signature. All I had to do was show up. I sat still, heavy inside. Part of me hesitated, hearing that old refrain, "Sophie, family comes first. Don't be selfish." But another voice rose louder. "Have they ever seen you as anything but their workhorse?" I turned on the office light, reached into my drawer for my fountain pen. A Parker, a gift from my first client when I was 29, a restaurateur who had gone bankrupt twice before I rebuilt his brand. I signed the attendance confirmation for the Boston meeting on the 15th, then sent it to Richard's assistant with a note, confirmed, looking forward to closing this together. No more hesitation. The next day, I handed internal duties to Maria and booked a flight from New York to Boston for the night of the 14th. I told my mother nothing, not Jacob, no explanations. I knew if I did, they'd dismiss it as rebellion from the daughter who didn't know her place. I didn't need them to understand why I chose this meeting over standing behind my brother's stage. I only needed to keep my promise to myself, that no one would drag me back into silence. And on the morning of the 15th, when I stepped out of the 30th floor elevator at the Grand Allura, in a black suit with Aurora's gold pin on my collar, I was ready, not for a fight, but for a deal. Not to prove myself to family, but to bring what I had built with my soul to its rightful place. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. I only needed to be there on time, in role, as my true self. And I was. Not to prove to them, but to keep my word to me. I wasn't at the program rehearsal that afternoon, but I later heard every detail. My mother had called 3 event firms in 2 days, once she knew I wouldn't return to help. She chose a premium savings package from an online agency promising luxury service at minimal cost. They didn't know she micromanaged every detail, every glass poured. They didn't know that savings would slice through the family's reputation among the city's business elite. By 7 p.m., guests began to arrive. Crystal chandeliers lit the red carpet, a backdrop reading, "Jacob and Emily, a night of legacy," letters in gold shimmer. But the name tags were blurry, half of them misspelled. The first course served was a frozen pumpkin soup reheated in a microwave behind the curtain, plastic fumes mixing with heavy perfume from women crowding the cocktail bar. "Didn't Sophie handle this event?" someone asked my mother. She forced a smile. "She's busy looking for work." The guests nodded politely, but their eyes said it all: disappointment. The atmosphere began to sink as the main course was served. Thick, uneven slices of beef, a cold sour sauce pooling across the plate. A guest named Charles, one of my father's former partners, leaned over and whispered to the person next to him, "Tastes like an economy-class airplane meal." In the corner, Jacob tried to stay composed, while Emily, pale as paper, kept her eyes on her phone to avoid looking up. The inexperienced waitstaff, hands trembling as they carried trays, spilled a glass of red wine onto the dress of Mrs. Laurel, the CFO my mother had once described as the woman who could open the door for Jacob into the upper tier of investors. My mother lost control from that moment on. She stood up, ignoring every stare, and stormed toward the stage, where a few musicians were tuning their instruments. "What is this?" she hissed through clenched teeth, pointing at the melted cream dessert that looked more like half-baked dough than a finished cake. The event coordinator fumbled while the kitchen staff looked around helplessly. "We thought your daughter was handling this." "Miss Sophie?" someone asked quietly. That question poured fuel on the fire. "That girl?" My mother let out a harsh laugh, her voice cracking. "She's useless, can't do anything right. Every year I force her into the kitchen. Does she really think she's talented at something?" Her words rang clear, loud enough for at least 20 people nearby to hear. She didn't notice or didn't care. She needed someone to blame, and I had always been the easiest target. The problem was, I wasn't there to carry it anymore. When the wedding cake was rolled out, a three-tiered structure with the middle layer leaning to one side, the entire hall burst into mocking laughter. "This is legacy?" someone muttered. Jacob climbed onto the stage, attempting a thank you speech, but his voice cracked on the second sentence. No one listened. Half the guests began leaving early. Some excused themselves to check on their kids. Others pretended to have urgent calls. Among them were several key figures from Westbridge Capital people I had met at a Miami conference. Messages from them arrived on my phone just as I reached my room. "Chaotic dinner. Your mother blamed you publicly." Jacob couldn't control the situation. I looked at the screen, not surprised, just hollow. At 1 a.m., my phone rang. I didn't need to check the name. I picked up. "Sophie." My mother's voice was hoarse, laced with rage and humiliation. "Are you satisfied now?" "I'm ruined. Completely ruined." I said nothing. "I told you. All you had to do was show up and play your role. But no, you chose to run off and play your little pretend CEO game." "I'm not pretending. I run Aurora Concepts. I signed with Westbridge this morning. Richard Donovan just confirmed the deal worth over $30 million. Silence stretched for 8 long seconds. "Don't lie to me. Richard Donovan is your father's man. Why would he work with you?" "Because he doesn't care who I am, only what I can deliver." Her breath caught, like she had been doused in cold water. "You did this? To get back at me?" I shook my head, though she couldn't see. "No, Mother, I did this to save myself." Nothing more came from her end, but I could hear it, the sound of something collapsing. Not just the party, but a 30-year illusion. The ballroom air hadn't yet cooled after the slap and insults when the grand doors at the back swung open. A few turned their heads, curious at first. But when they saw the man entering, tall, weathered silver hair, a sharp gray Savile Row suit, nearly every murmur in the room fell silent. Richard Donovan was no stranger in Boston finance. He was the kind of man whose mere presence shifted the conversation in any room. Chairman of Westbridge Capital, investor overseeing a portfolio worth nearly $3 billion, strategic shareholder in multiple Fortune 500 companies, and most recently, the partner my father had pursued for 4 years without sealing a deal. He didn't bring an entourage. No announcement. No introduction. He walked in like a cold wind slicing through a stifling room. And then he looked at me. His gaze wasn't curious nor doubtful, it was familiar. He smiled, slid his hand from his pocket, and strode straight toward me, still standing near the stage, where the lopsided cake leaned with frosting dripping down. "Great to see you, boss," he said, his warm voice carrying clearly across the hall. "Tomorrow we finalize the partnership." I took his hand firmly, calmly. "I look forward to it." That greeting was like a thunderbolt cracking through the heart of a crumbling room. I heard a glass clink hard against a plate to my right, a sharp inhale from the main table. Silence spread like spilled wine across a tablecloth. My mother stood frozen by the dessert table, her hand rigid, lips parted, but no words coming out. Jacob hunched slightly as if to bow, but stopped mid-motion, his eyes lost, as though refusing to believe what was unfolding. Emily turned to me, her face pale with shock, her breath visibly shallow. "Boss?" someone whispered. Then another echoed, "Did Donovan just call her boss?" I stayed composed. My smile wasn't for gloating. It was release of years spent building in silence, of being pushed aside, of hearing endlessly that she'll never amount to anything. Richard glanced around, caught my mother's eyes, gave a polite nod, and said nothing. Then he turned back to me. "The boardroom is ready for tomorrow. My legal team will arrive at 8 a.m. I hear Forbes wants to attend as well. I nodded. I agreed to let them film the signing. They want to write about how an independent firm broke into strategy markets through perseverance. He smiled. Now that's a story worth telling, and not easily earned. When he turned and left, leaving behind a chilling hush, I faced my mother. Her eyes no longer burned with anger. They were filled with fear. Sophie, she said my name, but nothing followed. I looked at her, not with hatred, not with triumph, but with resolve, something she had never seen in me before. I won't apologize for not running Jacob's engagement, I said softly, because I'm not a servant. You're the CEO of what? Her voice cracked. Is this real? Jacob cut in, disbelief in his tone. Donovan just called you boss. Was that really you? I didn't look at him, only nodded. Aurora Concepts, a strategy consultancy, headquarters in New York. 32 core staff, over 50 rotating partners. Our clients include the very corporations Mother invited tonight. Emily covered her mouth, eyes wide as if swallowing the truth whole. A woman nearby, I remembered she was the PR director of a luxury brand who once invited me to speak at a spring summit, stepped closer and whispered, I thought I'd seen you before. It was your speech at the Women's Business Forum. I inclined my head. She turned to my mother, her gaze entirely changed. No one needed to say more, no one dared ask. Everyone knew something had cracked, not the mask my mother wore, not the family reputation they tried to preserve, but the hollow core beneath, where true worth had long been buried under prejudice and dismissal. I walked out of the hall, straight to the elevator, without looking back. I didn't need to do anything else, because for the first time in my life I wasn't the one standing at the edge of the room. They were. And I walked away tall, steady, unbowed. As I stepped out of the elevator and hadn't yet reached the hotel doors, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages, emails, missed calls, one after another, an endless stream. I didn't answer any. I only texted my assistant that I was on my way back to my room. I needed a few minutes to breathe, to reclaim silence after the turn that had plunged an entire engagement into chaos. And in that ballroom, as Maria later told me, it was like a play where everyone suddenly realized the main character wasn't who they thought. One by one, guests began whispering. The name Aurora Concepts spread from group to group. She was behind the Bellagio Resort's rebrand? No way, but Donovan called her boss. She spoke at Women in Leadership in Chicago. I remember that talk. Eyes shifted away from Jacob and Emily, as if the couple at the center no longer held gravity. A middle-aged woman in a beige suit, I recalled, she was VP of strategy for a major cosmetics group, walked up to my mother and asked gently, Mrs. Clark, is your daughter really the CEO of Aurora? I'm working with them on our summer campaign, but I've never met the official CEO. It was Sophie all along? My mother's hands clenched tight, her voice brittle. She's making it up, always has. Imagines things for attention. I raised her. I know her better than anyone. The woman said nothing, only nodded, then turned away. But minutes later, the LED screen behind the stage where Jacob and Emily's wedding photos had played suddenly changed. One of the digital media staff, who had previously collaborated with Aurora Concepts, had quickly connected their personal device to the shared display. No music, no effects. Just one stark image projected across the room. The upcoming Forbes cover, bold headline blazing. Aurora Concepts, the $200 million empire founded by Sophie Clark. Beneath that headline was a photo of me in a black suit, signing a contract with Westbridge Capital, with the caption, Portrait of the Quiet Female CEO Reshaping America's Hospitality Industry. The entire hall went silent. Every whisper stopped. No one moved. Even my father, the one who always carried himself with composure, couldn't hide his shock at seeing the Clark name tied to a figure he had believed only men in the industry could ever reach. Jacob froze in place. Emily turned to my mother, whispering something but received no reply. A man pulled out his phone, searched quickly, and then held up the screen to those nearby. Sophie Clark, the woman behind the remarkable revival of Bellevue hotels. Another woman spoke up. I met her at the Midwest Brand Strategy Summit. She was sharp, calm. I never imagined that person was the daughter of this family. My mother began to unravel. Not true, all of this is fabricated. She paid for press coverage. She created a false image just to go against me. But no one reacted. No one believed her. That denial in that moment was no longer just words. It was the clearest proof that she had grown accustomed to living inside a bubble of her own making. One of the tech staff whispered, "I just checked. Forbes confirmed it. She made this year's 40 under 40. The national issue goes live tomorrow." My mother looked around, realizing people were slowly turning their backs. No one spoke up for her, not a single person. The name Sophie was no longer stuck in its old shadow, no longer synonymous with nuisance or burden. It now carried weight. At last, my father stepped out from the small circle of men he had been standing with. He walked slowly, as if his legs had lost their sense of direction. When he reached my mother, he said only, "You were wrong about her, and you've cost us more than you realize." My mother said nothing. She just stood there, eyes no longer sharp but adrift, flustered and defensive, like someone who had no tools left to control the situation. Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing, not with calls from her, but with dozens of congratulatory messages from partners, invitations for new collaborations, requests for press interviews. I didn't open them. I didn't need to. I had lived long enough in silence to know the sound of truth when it breaks through. And truth doesn't need to scream. It only needs timing. The right moment, the right witness. And now, that truth stood in the middle of my mother's lavish ballroom, plain, unadorned, but impossible to erase. After the party, it took less than 24 hours for the domino effect to spread. Things collapsed so fast I hardly had to touch a single piece, just stood still and watched as everything fell under its own weight. By noon the next day, while I was reviewing documents for the Westbridge signing, Maria walked into the internal conference room, carrying an iPad already open to an email. "You should see this," she said, setting it gently on the table. I leaned forward to read. It was a letter from the legal team of Lakeshore Capital Growth Fund, the venture capital firm Jacob and my father had courted for nearly 2 years, hoping to secure investment for Jacob's new interior design startup. The first line, "We regret to inform you that we are suspending all investment review procedures." The reason was laid out below. After the Grand Allure incident, the firm found significant discrepancies between the image presented by the Clark family and reality. They even cited a headline from a business magazine published that very morning. "The darkness behind the glitter. Why wealthy families hide the truth about their overlooked children." Beneath the article was a photo of my mother pointing at me during the engagement party, her face twisted with fury, while I stood calmly beside Richard Donovan, a glass of white wine in hand. I didn't feel triumphant, but I wasn't surprised either. Less than an hour later, Jacob called. I hesitated a few seconds, then answered, "Sophie." His voice was so small I had to press the phone tightly to my ear. "I lost the Lakeshore deal. They pulled everything." I leaned back in my chair, gazing out the floor-to-ceiling window where the Boston morning sun hit the red brick buildings. "They don't want to work with liars," I said. Jacob didn't reply right away. I heard him exhale heavily, then silence stretched between us. "You once said I've never had to do anything alone. I think you were right." It's not because I want you to fail, I answered slowly. It's just when someone never learns to stand on their own, even a small stumble can bring them down. Jacob's voice wavered. Emily left me. She said I have no voice of my own, that I live on borrowed confidence. I stayed quiet. Do you think I really don't have what it takes? I glanced at the photo of the Aurora team on the wall above my desk, the faces of those who had chosen to follow me since the very beginning, when our office was a rented basement under a bakery. No one is born with it, Jacob. You only learn when no one clears the path for you anymore. I didn't blame him. He was just another product of the system my parents built. The difference was he had been sheltered, and I had been cast aside. He learned to assume he was worthy, while I had to prove it step by step. The call ended in silence. No anger, no explanation. Some truths are too painful to name, but naming them isn't necessary. They only need to be acknowledged. And that day, I heard it in Jacob's voice. By late afternoon, I learned Emily had canceled the Napa Valley Villa wedding reservation. Her family sent the hotel an apology, citing changed family circumstances. That evening, a friend from the philanthropy circle messaged me privately. Your mother was just removed from the statewide Women's Education Fund board. They said her media presence no longer fits the organization's image. I looked at the message without any sharp reaction. Not joy, not anger, just an odd emptiness, as if someone had pulled away a stage curtain I had stared at for 30 years. My mother had built her entire life on glitter-expensive gowns, afternoon teas with society wives, speeches about compassion and maternal sacrifice. I had once sat in the back rows, listening to her talk about children needing opportunities to rise through kindness. Each time, I turned away, because I never knew whether to laugh or cry. And now, that woman was being pushed to the sidelines by the very ideals she once performed. By the end of the day, my father called, not in the commanding tone of a once powerful Chicago construction mogul. His voice was slow, raspy. Can I see you? I didn't answer right away. It had been so long since we'd sat face to face as equals. At family dinners, he always sat at the head, and I at the far end, close enough to hear, but too far to be invited to speak. I checked the clock. 11 p.m. My makeup from the afternoon media session still on. If you're free, he continued, hesitant, I'll be at the Black Oak Bar downstairs until midnight. No pressure. I hung up. No promise. No refusal. But I sat there for a few minutes longer before standing. Because I understood the regret in his eyes yesterday wasn't about defending himself. It was the look of someone who finally realized that years of silence had also been complicity. I left my room at 11:36. No fresh makeup, no change of clothes, nothing but my keycard and a small wallet. The elevator carried me down quietly. The Black Oak Bar sat in the hotel's south corner, where warm amber lights fell over dark leather chairs and mahogany tables, reflecting dim streaks like fading memories. He was already there, his back slightly stooped more than the last time I saw him clearly. The light revealed hair gone white at the temples, the once indomitable frame now just a tired shell. I walked closer. Neither of us spoke for the first few seconds. He looked at me, his eyes no longer hard but clouded like a mirror whose silver had worn away. Sophie. I sat across from him. The server came by, and I nodded for a glass of water. I didn't think you'd come, he said, his words slow, each one heavy like a stone dropping into water. I wasn't sure I would, I replied. He gave a faint laugh, shook his head. Fair enough, maybe. It's time I listened instead of talked. I stayed silent, waiting. I have no defense, only silence. And the truth is, I saw signs years ago. But I chose to stand aside. because I thought as long as you didn't fight back, everything would appear intact. So, as long as I endured, the family looked perfect, I said. He nodded, not avoiding my eyes. Sometimes I envied you, not for success, for freedom. You dared to leave, and I never did. A part of me wanted to laugh. Another part felt choked. Right now, he continued, this family is in free fall. And your mother, she has no way left to control it. She's panicked. Jacob is lost. Everything is falling onto one person. You. I leaned back, resting my hand on the table. I'm not the anchor that keeps everyone from sinking. I know. I didn't come back to patch what's torn. I'm not here to play savior. I didn't come to ask you to. He paused, exhaling slowly. We came here to listen. If you still want us to exist as a family, then give us that chance. But if you don't, I won't blame you. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my wallet and laid it on the table. He looked at it, then at me. I nodded. I wrote this down earlier today. If anyone in this family wants to talk, this is where it starts. He unfolded it, reading each line carefully, not skipping a word. 1. Respect as equals. No one has the right to impose. No sarcasm. No condescending tone. 2. Never treat me as a servant, a cleaner, or someone to handle holiday chores. I do not serve anyone in this family. 3. A public apology. Nothing elaborate, but clear, in front of others, because the pain I endured happened in front of others. 4. Everyone agrees to family therapy. Each person has an individual session and one joint session. No excuses about being busy, no avoidance. 5. Financial independence. No one is allowed to ask me for money. I am not a bank or a lifeline. He folded the paper back, setting it down. Heavy. I've carried heavier for 30 years, I replied. You're really willing to cut ties? Absolutely. If these terms aren't accepted, I'll go on living without carrying anyone along. He sat in thought for a long time, then finally said, You will have respect. From me. And if your mother cannot, then I will speak. I didn't nod. I didn't thank him. Because that was never something that should have had to be demanded. Jacob. He hesitated. He may not be strong, but he's trying. And he wants to fix things. I don't need promises. I need action. Will you give us a chance? I met his eyes. If you truly want to be my family, then it can't be the family we used to be. He nodded, this time without reluctance, without denial, only acceptance. Then it starts here, I said, slipping the paper back into my wallet. And it starts as adults. He reached out his hand. I looked at it, the same hand that once knocked on the table to order me around, like restaurant staff. I waited a breath before placing my hand on his. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. Just a handshake between two people, if they could still call each other family. October in Boston carried a crisp chill. Golden ginkgo leaves mingled with fiery red maples, lining the entrance to Harvard Business School. I stood backstage at Spangler Auditorium, gripping the microphone, my heart calm in a way that felt almost strange. Every time I'd stepped onto a stage before, my heartbeat thundered. But today I felt steady like a stone pillar in the surf. 1 year, from that chaotic night at the engagement party to this moment, everything had shifted in ways no one could have imagined. Aurora Concepts now operated across 6 states. My team had tripled in size. We had just crossed a $480 million valuation and were preparing for NASDAQ listing. But those numbers, impressive as they were, weren't what moved me most today. The stage doors swung open. The host announced, "Please welcome the founder and CEO of Aurora Concepts, keynote speaker for the event Women's Business Mindset Transformation, Miss Sophie Clark." I stepped out to applause, rolling like waves. Under the lights, I didn't search for anyone in the crowd, but I knew my father was seated in the third row. And my mother, though she had avoided appearances since last year's debacle, was quietly present. She didn't speak much anymore, but her recent actions showed she was learning to listen. I began with a simple story, not dramatic, not grand, just the story of a child dismissed inside her own home. As a girl, I believed if I worked hard enough, someone would notice. That if I stayed silent, patient, one day I'd be recognized. But I was wrong. Not everyone knows how to see with their heart. Some only see value when you're placed in a role of servitude. Silence spread through the hall. I went on, I'm not here to dwell on pain. I stand here to speak about power, the power of choosing yourself. When I decided not to plan my brother's engagement party, I wasn't just refusing a task, I was claiming my own voice. When I signed with Westbridge, I wasn't only choosing a career, I was choosing freedom. An older woman in the middle rows nodded slowly, her eyes brimming. I knew she understood that moment when a woman refuses to live as someone else's shadow. Success does not require permission, I said clearly. Not parental approval, not society's applause. It begins when you believe you are worthy. I recounted that night, the slap, the disdain, and the moment Richard Donovan walked into the room. Laughter rippled lightly when I recalled how he called me boss in front of those who had thought I was nothing more than help staff. People ask if I forgave my family. The answer is yes, but not by going back to the way things were. Forgiveness came by rebuilding boundaries, firm and uncompromising. I told them about the 5 conditions, about the therapy sessions we all attended, about dinners that carried less tension, about text messages imperfect, but more sincere. My mother had never fully apologized, but one day she brought me a basket of red apples and said, "Don't forget to eat properly this week." Sometimes the smallest gestures are the loudest words. In the audience, my father remained silent, watching me. I remembered the first therapy session, him standing on the balcony for hours, saying nothing, just holding the letter I'd written, his eyes wet. I ended my talk with the words I had carried for a year. Your worth does not depend on whether someone sees it. Sometimes the brightest light comes from the very darkness others tried to lock you in. The hall rose to its feet, clapping, not for my words, but for something inside them that had been touched. In that instant, I saw familiar faces, investors who had once turned me down, now standing. A former professor who had advised me to study accounting instead of marketing, now wiping tears. I stepped down. My father rose. He didn't speak, only held my hand firmly. My mother stood behind him, clutching a worn notebook where she had scribbled quotes I once shared. Neither spoke apologies, but in their eyes, I saw acknowledgement. I turned away, holding nothing back, because I had nothing left to hold. Everything worth keeping was already here in me, in Aurora, in the women learning to stand tall on their own feet. And in the simplest truth, I had never needed permission to shine. If you've ever been dismissed because you didn't fit your family's expectations, if you've ever had to choose between preserving your dignity and pleasing others, then maybe you'll understand that what I went through isn't just my story. I share this not to blame or expose anyone, but to remind us sometimes those closest to us test us the hardest. And through that, we learn to love ourselves, set healthy boundaries, and stand firm in any storm. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you've ever faced the choice between family and yourself, what did you do? Did you forgive? Did you set conditions? Or did you learn to walk away without looking back? Share your story below, because I believe someone out there needs to hear it to find the courage for their own journey. And if you care about stories of family, connection, wounds, healing, and the quiet strength of women in life's hidden corners, hit follow on this channel. Many more stories await, stories that may remind you that you are never alone and that strength has more forms than we often imagine.